Air travel came under a microscope immediately following the attacks. American flight schools were training grounds for the men behind the 9/11 attacks. Since then, pilots, flight crews, and flight instructors have taken giant steps in making our airplanes less vulnerable to another terrorist attack. Sarah Simnich talked to an aviation director about the precautions they're taking to put people at ease.
September 11th, I was actually flying here in Traverse City with students.
Aaron Cook is the director of aviation at Northwestern Michigan College. He says that day marks a major turning point for aviation.
I think people think a lot differently than what they used to with regards to aviation. We have to basically be more aware. We have to protect ourselves.
And he says the events of 9/11 are a constant reminder that we need to be more vigilant and better protected.
TSA has certainly asked us to do quite a bit when we look at flight training in general. I will say that all the things they've asked us to do are not unfounded or things that we shouldn't be doing.
Officials at NMC say there's been several changes made inside the airplane to ensure safety for flight crews.
You're going to see a cabin door that's reinforced and locked all the time. Crews are much more observant to abnormal actions by passengers. Certainly pilots are always thinking about it.
Added security details inside the airplane aren't the only changes the college made to their program.
We certainly run students through all the checks with regard to documents, passports, driver's license, things like that. It hasn't deterred people from getting into aviation at all.
Since 9/11, all aviation students have to go through a rigorous screening process to get into the program.
We are training some foreign students here, making sure that the people that are taught how to fly aircraft are well screened.
Aaron says aviation is an easy target for threats, but that's not stopping crews from moving forward.
The level of professionalism continues to rise given the level of risk that pilots and passengers are exposed to.
Organizations like the TSA are always looking for ways to improve security, and pilots, flight crews, and instructors are on board.
I think the actions of the TSA and the government to look at aviation and to look at how we protect ourselves are greater. We are safer than we were, absolutely.
Reporting in Traverse City, Sarah Simnich for Northern Michigan's News Leader.
For some, 10 years doesn't seem like a long time, but for a high school student, this past decade made up more than half of their life. Now schools across the country and here in Northern Michigan are trying to make sure students never forget. Kyle Mitchell visited schools and spoke with students and teachers about educating a new generation.
As soon as I actually walked in the door of, conveniently enough, my U.S. history class was when the second airplane hit.
Dustin Webb was a sophomore in high school on September 11, 2001. Now, a decade later, he teaches at Lake City High School, working to make sure his students never forget what happened.
I was just going into second grade, like 6 or 7 years old, and I just kind of remember in the classroom there was this feeling of panic, like the principal came in, the teachers were there.
When I had gone home, it was on the TV at home. My parents were, upset, confused. I mean, I know that it kind of just interrupted life for the entire day.
One student remembers watching the attacks on television from inside her classroom.
One of the kids asked, people are falling out the windows. And our teacher just looked at us and said, no, they're jumping.
When Mr. Webb takes on the subject of 9/11, he uses some of those clips and devotes extra time to covering the attacks, despite the brief mention in their history book.
It's kind of like talking about Pearl Harbor with the kids. It's a very short, this is what happened, this is when it happened, and this is what happened as a result of it. And 9/11 kind of gets the same glance. It's sad that that's all the look that it gets.
10th graders at Big Rapids High School were only in kindergarten on September the 11th, 2001. So for them, remembering what happened is more difficult.
I don't remember anything specifically that day. I just remember my dad being glued to the TV and him not telling me much about it.
The most damaging attack in our nation, you guys were alive for? Can you believe that?
Bill Bonning has been teaching history for 6 years. He says students' personal accounts of the attacks are beginning to fade since the first year he taught.
The teachers stopped class, turned on the TV, they watched it, they went home, they talked with their parents about it, and it was an incredibly insightful discussion. It gets harder now because the kids were young.
He had them interview somebody who wasn't so young. One student talked to her mother and her aunt.
While they were riding their bikes, they saw 2 airplanes in the sky make a U-turn. They thought it was strange, but they didn't think much about it.
Talking to the people who are there, who are living it, who are a part of it, that's been the best way for us to show it and teach it.
Reporting for Northern Michigan's News Leader, I'm Kyle Mitchell.
Next, the events of 9/11 have shaped us into the country we are today. 10 years later, why we'll never forget.